Okay, I think we'll crack on. I suspect what we're finding now is that now that the industry is largely back at work, lunchtime webinars are a bit more of a problem. So I'm assuming that there'll be rather more activity on catch up than there is live these days. But anyway, next week we've got an outside guest presenter, another guest presenter. We've got David Boone from the British Geological Survey, and he's going to be going through data that's available from their records that are of immense value when it comes to designing principally borehole arrays, but I'm sure he'll also talk about horizontal infrastructure as well. So that one should be of interest to anybody who is involved in designing borehole collector array systems. So we'll crack on. As usual, if you can post questions into the chat function, that would be great. I'm actually quite happy if people want to interject, but and I think there's a hand raising function somewhere. But ideally, post your questions in the chat. Chris is online. He's going to moderate the questions, and we'll have lots of time at the end. It's not a big presentation today, but I think it's an important subject because of the results of the audit which MCS themselves have been carried out, which I'm going to go through. So I've got my usual slide, like it, and I keep telling people, and I was presenting at the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre on Saturday, and just reminding everybody that that's where we've got to get back to. All our energy is coming from there, the sun. So what are the applicable standards? I think all of us, all installers are going to be aware of 3005, and that's been enforced now since April 17. That will probably remain unchanged. I say unchanged until the end of the domestic RHI because it's in the legislation. Although some of you may be aware that MCS are currently in the process of splitting 3005 into a separate design and install standards. So there'll be 3005D and 3005I. This doesn't mean that there's anything at all to stop installers who have the in-house capability holding both, being certified for both components. But it does open up a market to those newly moving across fossil fuel installers who want to do install only, don't want to have to go through design, and are happy to work under other people's designs, either buying them in or working as a subcontractor, MCS certified subcontractor, working under an umbrella scheme. So I think most people agree that this is a sensible move. The two draft standards are currently out for consultation. So if you've got a significant interest, please do have a look at the consultation available through the MCS website and respond accordingly. We've also got MCS 001. Now, I think most installers are less aware that this has some very important components for them, particularly on the subcontract basis, which was originally the primary topic of this discussion. We've also got MCS 020, which is the planning standard for air source. It has wind turbines in it as well, but obviously our interest is in the air source component. And then we've got MCS 031, which is the performance estimate template. There are one or two others that perhaps don't necessarily register so much with domestic installers. There's the 70 kilowatt document, which allows MCS certified systems for single dwellings that require more than 45 kilowatts to obtain certification, and one or two others. But those are the principal standards that installers of domestic ground and air source systems should be worried about. So the key component that we really wanted to draw attention to is this issue about subcontracting. And this actually appears in MCS 001, not in 3005. And the key component here, and obviously you can read this slide at your leisure properly, but the key component here is this requirement that there is a formal subcontract agreement So if a MCS certified contractor has some subcontractors working for them, either doing part of the actual MCS equipment install, or, for example, doing underfloor heating, or providing the drilling or the trenching contract. If that is in your contract as an MCS certified installer, you are required to have a formal written subcontract agreement. Okay, that is end of. You know, that is the requirement, and it is your responsibility to ensure that the subcontractor has the necessary competency to carry out the scope that they're required to do. And it's also your responsibility to ensure that they possess the appropriate insurances for that scope. And as a minimum, of course, that's public liability and employer's liability. But I think that professional indemnity insurance also needs to be looked at. And we'll talk about that a bit later on this morning. And then the clause 411(2), there, in other limited situations, I think that wording's poor myself, because I think this may be the vast majority of instances. It says it's permissible for physical installation, setting to work, commissioning to be undertaken by others, not subcontracted, provided that a contract between the MCS contractor and the commercial client details the parties. So in this instance, we're talking about, for instance, a main prime building contract where the builder has a subcontractor, a mechanical subcontractor, who's doing the plumbing work or the distribution systems. And then an MCS certified installer has been brought in under a separate contract to do the heat pump deployment. So there's no subcontract relationship between the MCS contractor and the plumber, and so you know the requirement to have a written contract doesn't exist. But there are still significant obligations which are covered then under 3005. So in 3005, under design, there are some key points here. And this thing about drawings, we have quite a lot of members, relatively small businesses who do not have in-house CAD facilities. This doesn't mean that you can't produce drawings. You can produce, workable drawings using MS Paint, editing JPEGs with MS Paint and what have you, and actually provide a bit of comfort level and self-protection. And the other part of this discussion is, apart from meeting contractual obligations, also self-preservation for installers. There's also a requirement for the ground heat exchange design table. So that needs to be completed. There's evidence of geological or soil thermal conductivity source. The standards aren't really explicit about that, but again, it's something that needs to be taken into account. There's the insurable design for the borehole or other collector, archetype collector array. Is an individual MCS certified or non-MCS certified contractor actually insured for that element of design functionality? There's a requirement to take responsibility for the collector array design. So even if it's not a subcontract, there is still a requirement on the MCS certified installer to be responsible for the design of the collector array. It is not appropriate to get the driller to work out how much boreholes required. That is not MCS compliant. And there's a requirement to take responsibility for the emitter system specification. Again, underfloor heating, radiator sizing, what have you, not the plumber. MCS is very explicit that those things remain under as a requirement, a contractual requirement for the MCS certified installer. Even if you're not doing the work yourselves, i.e. it's contracted direct somewhere else, you still have a responsibility to make sure that it works. And I've looked at a lot of audit type environments where there is clearly no trail, and you need to provide a trail. You've got to protect yourselves so that there is an auditable trail, because if there's a problem, the CBs and MCS themselves ultimately will be looking for an auditable trail. So if you've produced, for example, a sketch using MS Paint on a JPEG of a site plan that shows borehole locations, and you've had that signed and dated by the client, by the driller, and 3 months later, when you come back to work on the site and the boreholes are in and you find they're not where they should be, you have an auditable trail, which means that you can protect yourself against any future consequences from that. It's really, really important because, you know, we're here to look after our membership, and our membership is largely, of course, installers. So we're not necessarily here to take the side of MCS. We're here to ensure that our members are compliant and that they're able to protect themselves from problems that could be caused by third parties on the site or by clients themselves sometimes, some other regulators. You need to be able to look after yourselves. Handover is another big issue. So I've said drawings again, not necessarily in CAD. It's really, really important that the drawings are in the handover pack. Again, it's something that you can point to. It's an audit trail, really essential. The handover pack, you know, there are specific requirements in 3005 of what should be included. Another issue around handover is notification to building control. That is an issue, and you'll see in the audit results coming up that that's a reasonable high point on the list of non-compliances. Planning consent, where applicable. Now, for most domestic installs, permitted development rights apply for ground source, as we know. Bit more complicated when you get into non-domestic RHI applications, where Ofgem requires evidence of planning consent, even if it is permitted. But the important one here is MCS 020 for air source. So any of our members that are doing air source as well, really important that that is complied with, and evidence that it's complied with. So again, it's about record keeping. It's about keeping a good audit trail that you can point to protect yourselves in the future. D&O consent. This is another one where I think that, again, myself, I've seen a number of instances where installers that I think not really understood well the issue around D&O consent. So at the moment, we have this relatively new Energy Networks Association database for Connect and Notify. There is an increasing number of devices appearing on that database now as manufacturers are getting the hang of the process. The spreadsheet in the database sets out pretty clearly when devices enjoy Connect and Notify status, and when it is still a requirement to get prior consent to connect to the network. And that one is really, really important. Because it's the homeowner that's exposed at the end of the day. You know, if you've connected a device that doesn't have consent, and there's a problem on the network in the vicinity, and the distribution network operator discovers a heat pump that's unconsented, they can issue a desist notice. Absolutely, you know, no problem at all. So really, really important you don't leave the homeowners exposed to that sort of thing. And maintenance guidance. And of course, maintenance guidance is actually a domestic RHI requirement. You know, the RHI does require the homeowner, the applicants, to state each year in their annual confirmation that they are maintaining their system to manufacturers' guidelines. So it's very important that the handover pack includes what those guidelines, what those manufacturers' guidelines are. And I know there are one or two manufacturers who say actually no maintenance required, but I think most of us in the industry would say absolutely not. We should certainly be looking at filters. We should be looking at error code histories in the controllers. We should be looking at the thermal transfer fluid. There's a whole load of routine checks that should be looked through. So to the MCS audit report, and this is what really sort of drove the value of, I thought, of having this sort of conversation with our installer members. MCS have been running a audit, and in fact there's a review panel tomorrow which I'm sitting on. I'll be very interested to hear what they have to say. Sample sizes were broadly based on the number of technology deployments, and I haven't shown the sample sizes for PV and solar thermal biomass, but it largely relates to the proportion of products that are installed. So ground source sample size 13 projects, air source 89, and then the average non-conformances per installation as a percentage of the number of questions. So there were a number of questions posed, and that varied against each technology, obviously. But the number of non-conformances, you can see, ground source does by far the best, but it's still nearly 20%. That's quite high, and I think we can do better. You can see that we're doing significantly better than other technologies, but I think we can and we should be doing better. And again, this is all part of this self-preservation for installers. So what sort of non-compliances were being identified? So all the ground source projects audited produced at least one non-compliance. I mean, the same applied to air source too, actually. I haven't checked the other technologies, but I suspect that exactly the same. Many of them, of course, were minor and not ones that would cause a problem with MCS certification or ultimately with the domestic RHI, for example. But nonetheless, the idea that every single audited project threw up at least one non-compliance is disappointing. And you can see there I've listed what the predominant appearances of those non-compliances were. So performance estimate template problems, 30%. Power calculation, that's the sizing of the compressor, 15%. Compliance certificate either missing or incomplete, 15%. Building regulations where required, another 15%. Ground heat exchanger table 3, 62% of projects analysed had either failed to provide the table 3 or it was incomplete or incorrect. Now that's just not good enough. Actually, we must do better than that if we're going to expand our industry and succeed when we've got plenty of people looking in who would like to see us fall over, the incumbents in the fossil fuel sector and those that are that think that hydrogen needs to have a much bigger place. They're very keen for us to fall over, so we've got to do better. Notifications, that's building control, 38%, again relatively high. And then consents and permissions, and this is to do with DNO consents and what have you, another 31%. So it's quite high. There's quite a lot of non-compliances, most of them minor, as I said. None of the, few of these would have raised a problem in terms of having MCS certification for the project withdrawn, or would have caused a problem with the non-domestic RHI. But you can see that there are significant issues here, and if we're to enjoy the confidence of government and persuade them to give us policy that really supports electrification, we need to do our level best to improve our own performance. So I've just got one more slide here, which introduces a number of general topics, and I should have actually changed the order of this because I should have put training at the top, because that obviously reflects the audit and regulatory issues that I've just been talking through. So training, there's a lot of activity going on in the training front, and I won't necessarily go through it in much detail now, but clearly we've got to be able to demonstrate to government that we can train enough installers to allow the market to grow to the sort of levels that Committee on Climate Change, National Grid, and all the others are advocating, which is heading us towards 1 million installs a year by 2035, depending on whose document you read and when you read it. Certainly hundreds of thousands a year by the end of this decade. So we're going to need to train and retrain existing fossil fuel technicians and engineers, and we're going to do our best to bring in new entrants. And we've got members who have been working really hard on the apprenticeship scheme to get heat pumps back into the apprenticeship scheme. We're just about to start investigating how we tie into the new T levels that are being rolled out from September. We've got a small team who are working on a schools education program, which is great. And then we are fully involved in the process to develop the training criteria for a new low temperature heating course, which is being driven by the broad expectation that 55 degrees flow temperature will be mandated in building regulations when the new iteration is published, probably now Q1 next year. And that applies to all technologies, all fossil fuel technologies, everything. So there's a course being developed to effectively put the same requirements on fossil fuel installers that have always pertained to MCS certified installers. So heat loss calculations to the standard, room by room emitter sizing, pipe sizing, pump sizing, hydraulic balancing, all the things that MCS certified installers have been expected to do for years are now going to be included. And critically, the boiler manufacturers are supporting this. I think they've got to, because it's the last hurrah from their perspective. Green Homes Grant, so please pop your questions into the chat function about the Green Homes Grant. We can have a discussion about that when we get into the Q&A. The non-domestic RHI extension for installers who are involved in non-domestic, we can have a conversation about that in the Q&A. The £1 billion fund for decarbonisation of public buildings, again, talk about that. The Electrification of Heat Task Group, that's an entirely new body. So if you take the Green Homes Grant, the £1 billion for public buildings, the NDHR extension, and the creation of this Electrification of Heat Task Group, all of that has happened in the last month. Back in March, I was questioning whether or not government was serious about decarbonisation. And then, from the earlier consultations around the Clean Heat Grant, we were questioning whether or not their ambition was poor. 12,500 installs a year under the Clean Heat Grant, absolutely no use to man the beast. But suddenly we've had these 4 initiatives appear very quickly, and it really does look as if there's a realization now within the heart of policy making, because this clearly comes not from the civil servant operational layers that we talk to routinely. This is coming from a lot of this is coming from Treasury. It's partly COVID recovery, green recovery driven, of course, but it does demonstrate that electrification using heat pumps has suddenly gained a credibility within the top end of policy making and the Treasury that we didn't enjoy a while back. And I'd like to think that's partly driven by the initiatives of creating the Heat Pump Federation and getting significantly bigger parties involved that have the ear of government in a way that our industry on its own to date hasn't. And the last topic I'll put there is professional indemnity insurance. At the moment, there's no requirement for anybody to hold professional indemnity insurance. I think it will become a much stronger topic. I think that the Energy Saving Trust guidance to consumers will suggest that they ask to see evidence of professional indemnity insurance. Personally, I think that's a good thing. And on my personal view, I think that holding PI insurance should be a prerequisite for members of the trade bodies too. And then beyond just holding it, I think it's very important that the PI insurance actually covers you for what you're doing. And I think insurers are probably not that well versed yet in our technology and what we do, but I think if PI insurers realize that some installers were designing borehole arrays in potentially risk scenarios without holding appropriate qualifications to be doing so, and without taking the appropriate design steps to do so, they would say that they'd stepped outside the cover of their PI insurance. So I think that that's a topic which needs a bit more thought, a bit more discussion. And yeah, that's all I really wanted to say today. So relatively short, but I wanted to introduce these general topics of discussion because I think it's important to have opportunities to talk to our members and hear what they have to say and hear the questions which we can carry back into the ministry, of course. So there we go. That's it. Questions? Chris is, I think, in control of microphones and what have you. So I'm going to, I'll leave the spreadsheet up. I'll leave the slides up in case we need to refer back to them, Chris. So I see we've had a pretty thin audience, but I think, as I said, I think that's partly because most people are now back at work rather than being able to sit at their desk at lunchtime. So hopefully there'll be a lot of stuff going on catch up. And what I would encourage is that if people are watching on catch up and you have questions, please feel free to send them in, mail them into the technical panel, the Ground Source Heat Pump Association technical panel, and we will do our best to tackle them.
Thanks, Bean. That was very helpful. I've got one question from Edward Thompson. You would like some more details on the electrification of heat task groups that you mentioned.
Okay, so this is a new body which has been created literally in the last month. We have a seat, I have a seat on it. It is industry, it's consumer protection groups, it's standards bodies, it's the sort of great and the good in that it's Committee on Climate Change and what have you. And it's driven by a team which actually is within BASE that does have genuine heat experience, rather than being civil servants who are civil servants for its own sake and have come from work and pensions. Actually, it's being driven by civil servants who have significant history in heat. I can't, I'm afraid, tell you an awful lot about what it's doing yet because all of the content so far is embargoed. We've only had one meeting so far, and that was largely around terms of reference and setting out the stall of what this group is looking to do. But it's been made very clear by the deputy director who's running, deputy director level civil servant who's running this, that this is very much a task-driven group. This is not a talking shop, and it is looking at where the immediate impacts can be placed. And what I probably feel I can tell you is that oil is very much in the sights. Not quite sure what that means in terms of timeframes or mechanisms or anything else, but oil is in the sights, and that includes, I must tell you, distressed purchases. We had a conversation specifically offline after the meeting about whether or not distressed purchases were included. Now, of course, you know, the low-hanging fruit for an oil distressed purchase is LPG. But if we can work things appropriately, a proportion of those could yet still go to electrification. And clearly what we're looking for is to try and drive those that are still relying on oil to get into a planned conversion. Whether it's going to involve some specific and targeted financial assistance for those on oil, we don't yet know. But this is I think it's potentially an interesting group. And I think if you take those, the three other factors together that are moving in the direction of electrification, I think it's a sea change in the way that our technology is being viewed. So sorry, it's not. Sorry, I can't tell you more. But the fingers have been wrapped of some other technologists in the past who have been putting things into the public domain that were revealed in various places. I know that the biomass lobby and the AD lobby got their fingers wrapped quite heavily in the past for such things. So if you don't mind, I'm going to play a pretty straight bat for the time being, but obviously anything that we can release will be released and spread out to the membership as quickly as we possibly can.
Fantastic, Bean. Edward's just followed up with one question, which is, who set the group up?
It's Bayes driven.
Okay.
So it's a Bayes task group. Everything's hosted by Bayes. Obviously, it's all done online at the moment. So actually, it makes it quite easy. And I think the intention, they're talking about meeting very regularly. So it's sort of roughly every 4 to 5 weeks. So they are really looking to drive something of purpose and meaning through this particular group.
Great stuff. One question from me, Bean, if you don't mind, in absence of something in the chat, would be the splitting of the MIS into design, or splitting out the design in the MIS. Is it the intention to have somebody like myself, a professional designer who's certified in other ways, then have to register under that?
I don't think that you would be obligated. If you wanted to be able to sell MCS certified designs, then clearly you'd need to be MCS certified. But if your function is limited to the design of the borehole array, the ground collector arrays, then that is potentially a subcontract function that could sit either under design or under install. So I don't think that someone that's very specialized in an individual functionality will be under any obligation to become MCS certified. It really talks about the whole design process. So effectively what they've done is they've taken 3005 and they've taken all the design components and put it into design, and everything else is in install. So nothing has really changed, and at the moment, Chris, forgive me, you're not MCS certified at the moment, are you? Because you're not actually doing the full MCS design.
No, we're not.
You're doing a limited part, and I think that the critical thing for me here is that we encourage MCS certified and other installers to make use of professional, fully insured and experienced designers of things like ground arrays, because I do fear, we've discussed the lookup tables amongst ourselves a lot. They've been discussed at MCS Working Group 6 a lot. We know the limitations. We understand how they came into being. We were fielding questions only 2 days ago about, what happened, what can I do if I want to use 40 mil pipe, and the lookup tables, they were talking about 32 mil. I mean, so there are a whole load of limitations. And there's in the consultation for the MCS splitting, there is an option there to remove even the 30 kilowatt threshold, above which MCS designers now are required to seek expert help. And I think that's a problem, because that's going in what we would see as entirely the wrong direction. So we have some work to do, but the conversations I've had with people who I think are to be respected on this point actually see the value of what we're doing. And I think the missing bit that we haven't yet got across to people is that it is cheaper to go to a professional to get your borehole array designed than it is for an MCS certified installer to go out and pull a thermogeological report from a resource like the British Geological Survey and do the job themselves. The tragedy is we've seen lots of installers designing borehole arrays without the benefit of a thermogeological report, and clearly that's not design, that's guesswork. So does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very helpful. I mean, obviously, my personal view is that us being MCS registered would add absolutely zero value to us or our customers, because the MCS standard is well below what we work to. So I think that's an interesting and very useful point, Bean.
Yeah, I think it's only if you were going to be doing the full MCS design, everything, that you would be required to be MCS certified under the under the new proposals.
Ultimately, somebody has to take the MCS responsibility in the whole,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's obviously the core of the scheme, isn't it?
But if it's done properly, the MCS design entity who is certified will come to you as a subcontractor, and you will have a purchase agreement with them, and you will provide them. They'll give you the information. You will provide them with a design for the borehole array or the horizontal collector array, and they'll buy that in as a subcontract function, and that's perfectly legitimate within the scope of MCS, the MCS standard. What we need to do is to drive people into using a mechanism like that is fully insured and has a degree of professionalism wrapped around it that at the moment is not being applied universally.
Well, that's good to hear, Bean, and it's good to hear we're all pulling in the same direction. I had a couple. I was just saying to you yesterday on a call, Bean, that in the last couple of months I've had a couple of new customers come to us, and after doing a couple of jobs with us, have said I wouldn't go back to doing it myself. So I think the message is getting through.
Well, I think you're right, because we worked with the BGS in the last 6 months to withdraw the simple report product that they used to have available, on the basis that it didn't actually give anything like enough information, and so it wasn't misleading, but I think some installers were using it in a way that was inappropriate. So I think it was good that was withdrawn. But if you take the full product and you take all the modules, which I believe you should in order to do the job properly, that's an £870 report, I think. And then you've got to do the design. So actually, economically, probably better to go to an outside resource. And we need to what we need to do is to make sure that we can grow those resources so that people have got a range of options to go to, and that we publicise them, and that the benefits of going outside, not only in cost, but in, again, professional indemnity insurance and all those good things, that those benefits are clearly enunciated to our members and to non-members alike. We shouldn't restrict the spreading of best practice to just our membership. As we agreed at the last council meeting, we should make our standards available far and wide, because actually we want people to use them. And we don't want to restrict access to them. We want people to use them, and I think for me, that's the right decision. Okay.
Just a follow-up question from Brendan Lewis. He's made a statement that MIS 3005 clearly has not worked. How is the new format going to make it any better?
Well, that's a good question, and I think that there's the debate about whether or not MIS 3005 works or not. I don't think it's quite a closed debate yet, Brendan. I think the problem we have with MCS is not so much whether or not the standards work, it's whether or not the policing of the standards work. And I think that's really where the problems lay, certainly with MCS between 2008 and the novation of the scheme away from Bayes controller into the charitable institution. I think that even the most skeptical MCS watchers would have to admit that the transformation in MCS from what it was like under the previous management to what it's like now has been considerable. And I must tell you that Ian Rippon and his team, for them, the work has only just begun. The fact is, we need a standard of some sort. And so much better that we try and work with a scheme that has the right bones and the right people now involved in it, with a will to improve it and a will to make it work and a will to apply the teeth to police the scheme properly, than looking at trying to rip everything up and start again. I mean, I don't think that would be beneficial for any of us. But we absolutely need to be able to hold installers of microgeneration technologies to account, and in order to do that, you have to have standards. What we've lacked in the past is an ability to take them to task when they're not applying the standards. So So I think Brendan, we need to be a bit more generous about the improvements that we're seeing at MCS. I entirely accept that the history of the organisation and of the certification bodies particularly has been woeful.
I have to say, Bean, as probably one of the leading MCS skeptics in the industry, I have been very impressed with Ian since he's come on board.
I think if anybody spends time with Ian Rippon, they would go away saying, actually, that's a force for good. And I'm going to tell you, my single biggest fear is that someone's going to come along and offer him a lot more money to go and do something else. Because I think if he were to leave now, it would be a desperate shame. Fortunately, I think he's quite enthusiastic about what he does, and I think there's enough of us around him supporting him to encourage him that actually what he's doing is it could be a game changer for decarbonisation in the UK, and that clearly is good news. Those of us that are in this, not necessarily to try and make a fortune, but to try and do the right thing, we should be very supportive of what he's up to, because he's assembled a really good team. He's ripped out waste from the MCS organisation in a way that's allowing him now to reduce costs, and I think that most MCS installers will find that their costs of being MCS certified will be going down rather than up as a trend over the next few years. Wrapping up codes and making sure that that's not a separate issue. The immediate thing around Trustmark, which I know that some installers have been throwing up their, rolling their eyes on, that is a government piece. That's got nothing to do with MCS. That's a government piece because as a result of the Grenfell investigation, Trustmark has assumed a position that it didn't enjoy before that in terms of renovation, and so having sort of built that position, government had no choice but to use Trustmark for the £2 billion fund, and obviously MCS is a requirement for microgeneration. So yeah, it's a double hit. But actually becoming Trustmark registered, if you are already MCS certified, is A, very straightforward, and B, not excessively expensive. I'm led to believe it's around about £100. So it shouldn't kill. And if it means that you get access to the voucher scheme and can work up some increased business development on the back of the voucher scheme, great.
Just conscious of time now, Bean, so if I can just answer Brendan's question, he's saying that as an installer, he's really not seeing any significant difference in MCS. I think a lot of the work that's been done up to this point, you may not see the benefit of yet, but it is coming, I think is the answer to that. And then one final question, if I may, what's the fiscal background to the BEIS electrification of heat group, and can you talk about that?
Well, at the moment, as you're aware, there's ever since the Clean Heat Grant was first put forward, which most of us looked at and said, not worth the paper it's printed on, there has been this underlying sort of dialogue that says, yes, but there are other fiscal events coming along, and clearly we're beginning to see some of those now. The Clean Homes Grant, the Decarbonisation of Public Buildings Fund, the NDRHI extension. And the way I think we need to look at these is that what they're effectively doing, put together, is they're buying our sector a bit more time whilst existing or new, but programs of support exist. And that time can be used to evaluate the outputs from the heat and building strategy document that will be published this autumn, to evaluate the new Part L regulations when they're published, the future home standard when that's published. We've also potentially got an energy white paper that may appear this year. And I think what we need to be able to do as an industry is say, we're continuing with these various support mechanisms in the short term, and we are working very hard to get more than 6 months to spend the Green Homes Grant and the Public Buildings Fund, that £3 billion. Clearly, spending that on heat pumps in 6 months is going to be impossible. You know, let's face it, getting a ground source heat pump solution across the line from conceptual sell to the client to commissioning inside 6 months, almost impossible. And government recognise this, and they also, of course, recognise that public procurement process takes more than 6 months. So I am reasonably confident that we will get some shift in the deadline for delivery of both the Green Homes Grant and the decarbonisation of public buildings. Don't quote me on that yet. That's just my feeling. But what that will do is it will mean that the industry has support for a period of time that allows us to get our teeth into a much longer term strategic policy approach to the decarbonisation of heat and cooling. And that's what we need. You know, we need to get away from subsidies. As an industry, we've got to get away from subsidies. And the thing that I would throw in, you know, in terms of fiscal background, one of the key things that has come out, and at the moment, you know, it's just a simple one-line statement almost. Ministers now recognise the issue around the spark gap. And, you know, that is new. You know, hitherto, nobody in a real position of policy making has recognised the spark gap. Civil servants at operational level, absolutely. But it is definitely new that the Treasury, Number 10 Policy Unit and ministers in BEIS are beginning to recognise the spark gap. So, you know, that has a potential to be a fiscal event. And we've seen the green gas levy being talked at in consultation at the moment, not in legislation yet, but that's the first levy on fossil fuels. And I think that has opened up the opportunity for more. There's a lot more talk now about moving the green levies from electricity. So there are a number of potential fiscal events coming down the track that I think could be part of a much, much broader and deeper long-term energy strategy, genuine strategy, rather than the tactical sticking plasters that almost all the measures we've seen so far have been. That's probably not really quite answering the question, but I think it's the best I can do at the moment.
I think it's very well done, Bean. I think it just remains to thank you, Bean, for a very interesting discussion. And thanks also to all those with the questions. Perhaps you could put up the last slide again, Bean, just in case we got anybody looking for email address. That's it.
There you
So
go.
thanks very much indeed.
So if you want to access the technical panel with any questions, so for those watching on catch up, if you want to access the technical panel, please email your questions into the info@gshp.org.uk address, and we'll do our level best to pick them all up for you in due course. And my last comment, again, for those online and those watching on catch up, bring your chums to the party. If you've got industry colleagues who are not yet involved in the trade bodies, bring them to the party. We still need to build this really, really robust coalition in favour of electrification. Thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon.